Hey, beautiful souls. I am your storyteller, James, and welcome to part 2 of this intense, heart-wrenching journey. Last time, Maya uncovered the truth about her father, and now Julian claims he has changed, begging for a second chance. But can a heart broken by betrayal ever trust again? Stay with me till the very end. I promise you, you won't regret a single moment of this emotional ride. The door of the bookstore creaked softly as Julian stepped inside, the scent of fresh paper and polished wood, greeting him like a memory he wasn't sure he deserved. Each step he took echoed faintly against the hardwood floors, and though the store was calm, every sound seemed to amplify the beating of his heart. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the space, lingering on the colorful shelves, the gentle hum of the automated reading corner, and most importantly, the small figure of Maya. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, crayons scattered around her, completely absorbed in drawing. Her mother, Nia, moved quietly behind the counter, straightening books, her calm demeanor masking the tension Julian felt in his chest. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in the sleek glass towers of Manhattan, imagining a reunion filled with tears, forgiveness, and the easy warmth of family. Reality hit harder than he expected. He approached cautiously, keeping his tone soft, careful not to startle either of them. "Hello, Maya," he said, his voice carrying the faint tremor of nerves he tried to mask with practiced charm. Maya's head tilted slightly, her green eyes narrowing in cautious curiosity. She didn't smile, she didn't run. She simply studied him, her small lips pressed into a thin line. "You're really here?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, the kind of honesty only a child could wield. "Yes," Julian replied, offering a subtle smile, one he hoped conveyed warmth without arrogance. "I'm here. To see you. To spend some time together." Maya's hand hesitated over her crayons. She had seen pictures, heard whispers, and watched her mother carefully navigate the memory of Julian's absence. He had been a phantom in her life, a story she sometimes imagined but rarely believed would materialize. Nia's gaze flicked toward Julian, her expression unreadable. She had spent years rebuilding her life, raising Maya in a world untouched by Julian's ambition, untouched by his betrayals. She had allowed him this visit, supervised, to gauge if he was truly different, or if this was simply another performance. Julian knelt slightly to meet Maya's level, careful not to appear threatening, careful to project the sincerity he desperately wanted her to believe. "I've missed you," he said, each word weighted with meaning he hoped she could understand. "More than I can say." Maya didn't respond immediately. She studied him closely, picking up subtle details, how his eyes flickered when he thought no one was watching, the tension in his shoulders, the faint smirk he tried to mask as he straightened. There was something familiar about him, something comforting, but also something that whispered caution. "Can I color with you?" he asked softly, gesturing to the scattered crayons. Maya paused, considering. Finally, with a slight shrug, she handed him a red crayon. It was tentative, a test more than a gesture of trust. Julian's heart swelled at the simple act, though he tried to hide the emotion creeping into his voice. For a few minutes they sat side by side, coloring quietly. Julian chose the brightest shades, careful not to dominate the activity, careful to let Maya take the lead. Every time she looked up at him, he caught the flicker of skepticism, the wary calculation of a child who had learned to protect her heart. Nia observed silently from behind the counter, her arms folded. She had not expected Julian to be gentle, to be patient, to attempt small gestures of connection. His presence was a test, one she hadn't asked for, one she wasn't sure she trusted him to pass. Julian's gaze drifted to Nia. Her calm composure, her elegance, the way she carried herself with unshakable confidence, reminded him sharply of what he had lost. He had imagined many reunions, but he had never prepared for the reality of seeing her thriving, radiant, unbroken by the years he had abandoned. "Mommy, he's coloring outside the lines," Maya said suddenly, breaking the quiet moment, her tone not accusatory but simply factual. Nia smiled faintly, a soft acknowledgement without interference. She allowed the moment to breathe, understanding the subtle lessons Maya was learning about trust, about assessing character, about measuring sincerity. Julian looked down at his work, carefully attempting to stay within the lines, realizing in that moment how much control he had taken for granted in life and how little influence he truly had here. Every attempt at perfection reminded him of all the times he had failed to see the simple truths. Love could not be bought, trust could not be demanded, connection could not be forced. Minutes stretched into a quiet rhythm, punctuated by Maya's questions, Julian's careful responses, and Nia's silent scrutiny. Every glance he stole at his daughter revealed the innocence and intelligence he had neglected for so long. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to apologize without words, but the gap of years loomed too wide. Finally, it was time to leave. Julian stood slowly, brushing off his knees, careful not to rush, careful to project the sense of control he knew she expected, even if it was false. Maya's gaze followed him as he packed his bag, noting the subtle bulge inside, the hint of something hidden. She had learned, in the quiet resilience of her young life, to notice small details. The world was full of hidden motives, she had concluded, and Julian had always been an expert in masks. Julian approached the door, giving a slight, controlled smile. "I'll see you soon," he said, his tone casual, yet layered with unspoken intent. As he walked away, the soft click of the closing door echoed behind him. Maya's curiosity got the better of her. She waited a few heartbeats, then approached the bag he had left leaning against the wall. Her small fingers found the zipper, and with careful precision she opened it. Inside lay a single envelope, stark against the black fabric of the bag. Her pulse quickened. The envelope was crisp, cold, purposeful, and had a bold label scrawled across it: "My Plan." Maya's eyes widened. She glanced toward her mother, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and suspicion flooding her young mind. The weight of what she held was enormous. The small, seemingly innocent act of discovering a single envelope hinted at intentions far beyond her understanding. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for it, feeling the textured surface beneath her fingertips. The possibilities raced through her head. Why had Julian left this? Was it for her mother, for himself? And what exactly did he mean by "my plan"? The bookstore, once filled with soft warmth and the gentle hum of daily life, suddenly seemed heavier, charged with silent tension. The faint sunlight streaming through the front windows highlighted the envelope's presence, as though the world itself was forcing Maya to confront the shadows that had always lurked behind Julian's charm. She glanced again at Nia, whose expression was calm, but whose eyes reflected the faintest flicker of recognition, perhaps a warning, perhaps a test. Maya understood immediately that this envelope was dangerous, yet compelling. The curiosity that had been innate in her since birth clashed violently with the caution her mother had instilled. Her small hand hovered over the envelope, the silence around her deafening. Every instinct screamed both fear and fascination. She could sense that opening it would change something, perhaps everything, in the quiet rhythm of their lives. Her heart pounded, quick and uneven. Julian had left more than an object. He had left a statement, a challenge, a promise, and a threat, all encapsulated in the simple, chilling words: "My plan." Maya exhaled slowly, trying to steady her trembling fingers. She had always admired her mother's strength, her composure under pressure. She had learned to follow her example, to think carefully, to weigh every action. But curiosity, stubbornness, and the need to understand burned inside her, urging her to uncover the secret, no matter the consequences. Her eyes darted back to the doorway, half expecting Julian to reappear, half hoping he wouldn't. The world outside the bookstore felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered in this suspended moment was the envelope, the mystery it contained, and the subtle, dangerous smile Julian had worn as he left. Maya's small hand finally closed around it, gripping it tightly as though holding the fragile balance of power itself. Her mind raced with questions, with theories, with fears. What did her father intend? Was it a plan of love, a plan of manipulation, or something darker, something she couldn't yet name? The air in the bookstore felt charged, alive, heavy with unspoken tension. The quiet hum of the AI reading corner, the soft rustle of pages, even the faint creak of the wooden floorboards seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Maya slowly, deliberately, sat down on the rug again, clutching the envelope to her chest. She could feel the weight of Julian's presence lingering in the space, even though he had left. The small, confident smirk he had worn haunted her, a reminder that beneath the veneer of charm and repentance lay a man whose intentions could never be fully trusted. Her young mind raced through scenarios, both hopeful and frightening. What if Julian truly wanted to reconnect? What if he had returned, changed? What if he had returned with a plan that could hurt them? Each thought twisted in her head, each one heavier than the last, pushing her closer to a decision she knew would have consequences far beyond her years. Finally, she exhaled, the envelope pressed tightly against her chest. She knew she had a choice. Wait, confront, tell her mother, or explore the secret herself. Each option carried risk, but the intrigue, the mystery, and the potential revelation were irresistible. Her green eyes narrowed with determination. She wasn't just a child. She was a daughter who had learned to observe, to analyze, to anticipate. She understood that Julian's charm could mask danger, and that a plan, his plan, was never simple, never innocent. Maya's small fingers traced the bold letters on the envelope again. My plan. Her pulse quickened. The very words whispered promises of manipulation, of secrets, of power plays she couldn't yet comprehend. But she also sensed an opportunity, a moment to turn the tables, to gain understanding, to see the man behind the mask of false redemption. A flicker of fear passed through her, sharp and immediate, but determination overrode it. She would face this, unravel it, and protect her mother if necessary. Even in her young age, she understood the stakes, and the first step was the envelope, the plan, the unknown. Maya took a deep breath, her small hands gripping the envelope tightly, her heart pounding. She looked toward the doorway, half expecting Julian to return at any moment, half preparing for the consequences of what she was about to uncover. The air around her felt heavy, charged, and alive with anticipation. Her mother, Nia, moved behind the counter, unaware of Maya's discovery, focused on her work, but always present, always watchful. Maya's heart clenched at the thought of her mother's safety, at the thought that this envelope, this plan, could change everything. The quiet tension in the bookstore stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Maya's curiosity battled with caution, innocence battled with intuition, and the envelope rested between them, holding secrets, promises, and threats alike. Finally, with a determined exhale, Maya opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded precisely, with words that made her breath catch. She read, her eyes widening with shock and disbelief, understanding instantly that whatever Julian had left for them was far more than a simple note. It was the beginning of a challenge, a game, a test that would define their next days, months, perhaps years. Her hand trembled. The words on the paper burned into her mind, into her very soul, leaving no room for innocence or ignorance. Julian's plan had begun. The bookstore felt smaller, charged with suspense, heavy with expectation. Maya's pulse raced. the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, even as she glanced toward the counter where her mother worked, unaware of the storm that had silently entered their lives. Maya's green eyes burned with determination, understanding, and the faintest hint of fear. Julian had returned with charm, with promises, and now with a plan. And she, small but perceptive, would have to navigate the first, dangerous step. Maya unfolded the paper inside the envelope. Written in Julian's precise handwriting were three simple words that sent a shiver down her spine. "It begins now." The envelope trembled slightly in Maya's small hands as she carefully tore open the seal, curiosity and suspicion warring in her green eyes. The morning sunlight fell through the kitchen window, catching the edges of the paper as if illuminating a secret that was never meant for her. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from a deep-seated anticipation, a sense that something in her father's sudden return might never be as it seemed. Inside, neatly folded, were slips of paper, glossy invitations, and small trinkets that seemed innocent at first glance. A miniature Eiffel Tower keychain, a brochure for a luxury cruise, tickets to a Broadway show. Each item carried the weight of indulgence, a promise of excitement and adventure. But Maya's instincts, finely tuned from years of observing both her mother and Julian, immediately raised red flags. She pulled out a note, its edges crisp, the handwriting precise, deliberate. "For you, my little star. You deserve the world, and I plan to give it." Maya's lips pressed together. The words were smooth, charming, but the intent behind them smelled of calculation, of a carefully laid trap disguised as affection. Her eyes narrowed as she rifled through the remaining notes. Each one carried the same tone: generous offers, gifts, enticing promises, and subtle attempts to tug at her loyalty, to make her feel special, to plant seeds of desire for a father she barely knew. A pang of anger struck her chest. She felt the old wound reopen, the emptiness of years without him, the nights when her small hands reached for comfort and found nothing but silence. Julian's absence had been total, absolute, yet here he was, offering treasures and trinkets as if they could erase the past. Maya's small hands clenched into fists around the envelope. She knew better. She had seen enough manipulation to recognize the patterns. The smiles, the gifts, the soft words, all meant to persuade, to disarm, to make her forget that the man in front of her had been gone for so long, that he had abandoned the life he now claimed to care about. With the envelope still in her hands, she made her way to the living room where Nia was sorting through a stack of bills and community event flyers. Nia's eyes lifted, warm but cautious, as Maya approached. There was a tension in the air that even a child could sense, a heaviness that made Nia's chest tighten. "Mom," Maya said, her voice low, urgent. "You need to see this." She placed the envelope on the table, sliding its contents toward her mother. Nia raised an eyebrow, curiosity mingled with a wary suspicion that had been hard-earned over years of Julian's absence and broken promises. Maya watched Nia's eyes scan the papers, flicking over each note and gift with the precision of someone trained to detect the smallest anomaly. Nia's expression remained calm, measured, but the subtle furrow of her brow betrayed her unease. "He actually wrote all this?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "Yes," Maya said, her green eyes flashing. "And I don't trust him. He's trying to make me forget everything he did, like gifts can fix what he broke." Her small hands trembled as she pushed the papers closer to Nia. "Mom, we have to test him. We can't just let him charm us. We need to know if he really changed, or if this is all just another plan." Nia leaned back slightly, folding her hands over the envelope, the weight of the moment pressing down. She had faced manipulation before, but never with her daughter's sharp, unwavering intuition guiding her. She allowed herself a small smile, tinged with pride at Maya's perceptiveness. "You're right," Nia said softly. "We'll find out exactly who he is. and we'll do it carefully without letting him suspect a thing." Together, mother and daughter began to strategize, their voices quiet but intense, weaving plans that were clever, precise, and layered. They decided to set up small tests, ways to observe Julian's reactions without alerting him to their awareness. Would he genuinely want to spend time with Maya? Or was he calculating how to insert himself into their lives for his own benefit? Every gift, every promise, every note would be scrutinized, dissected, measured against the reality of his past actions. Hours passed, the afternoon sunlight fading into the golden hue of evening. Maya helped Nia hide the envelope, placing it in a drawer under layers of ordinary papers to ensure Julian would never suspect she had seen it. They created scenarios where Julian's true intentions could reveal themselves. Casual conversations, subtle probes, questions that seemed innocent but were loaded with significance. Maya's mind raced as she thought about her father, the man who had abandoned them, the man who now smiled so easily, whose charm seemed effortless, whose presence still carried that subtle, unnerving smirk that spoke of secrets and silent calculations. She felt a mix of anger, curiosity, and caution, emotions that tugged at her in opposing directions. She wanted to believe he could change. She wanted to trust, but the envelope had reminded her that appearances could be deceptive. As night fell, the house settled into a tense quiet. Nia tucked Maya into bed, her own thoughts lingering on the envelope, on Julian's subtle smirk, on the dangerous charm he wielded like a weapon. "Remember," she whispered, pressing a gentle hand to Maya's hair, "we control the game, not him. No matter what he says or does, we see through it. Together." Maya nodded, hugging her mother tightly, feeling the protective strength that radiated from Nia like a shield. She knew that their bond was their greatest weapon, that no gift, no smile, no promise from Julian could weaken the trust and resilience they shared. Hours later, Julian sat in a dimly lit hotel room, his phone pressed to his ear, unaware that every word he spoke was already intercepted by the observant eyes of a daughter who would not be fooled. His voice was calm, smooth, confident as he outlined plans, his mind convinced of the precision and inevitability of his moves. Maya, hidden in the shadows of her room, listened silently, absorbing every word, every subtle hint, every carefully planned step. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the empowerment of knowledge. Finally, she could see the layers of deception, the patterns of manipulation that had characterized Julian's life, and now threatened theirs. She glanced at the envelope one last time, feeling the weight of its contents, feeling the responsibility that came with knowledge. Her eyes hardened with determination. She would not let her father's charm mask the truth. She would not allow manipulation to dictate their lives. As she slipped under her covers, the phone call continued in the distance, Julian's voice smooth and deliberate. Maya's mind replayed every note, every gift, every word, and in the quiet of the night a plan began to form in her young, sharp mind, a plan to protect her mother, to protect herself, to test Julian in ways he could never anticipate. She smiled faintly, a mixture of defiance and cunning. She had the upper hand now, even if he didn't know it, and for the first time she felt a thrill of control, a sense that the game had shifted, that Julian's carefully constructed confidence might finally encounter a force he could not manipulate. The shadows of the room deepened. The clock ticked steadily. Outside, the city lights twinkled, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing in a small house, where intelligence, love, and vigilance had aligned to challenge a man who thought he could return unscathed. And then, just as she settled her thoughts, she pressed a button on her small recorder, capturing the final words of Julian's call. A call that would become evidence of intention, proof of manipulation, a tool of insight for mother and daughter alike. Maya's eyes glinted with the quiet triumph of someone who had seen the truth before the world did. She clutched the envelope once more, imagining the possibilities, the strategies, the revelations that would follow. Every note, every gift, every plan Julian had set in motion was now under her scrutiny. For hours she lay awake, mind racing with ideas, scenarios, and calculations. She imagined Julian walking into the room, confident, unaware that the child he sought to charm had already anticipated his moves, had already prepared for his subtle manipulations. The night deepened further. Every sound of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the trees outside, the distant hum of traffic heightened Maya's focus. She was alert, aware, ready. Julian's return had been calculated, his gestures precise, but so had been her observation. She would not be fooled. In the quiet, the final thought formed in her mind, clear and resolute. Knowledge was power, and she held it. Julian's plan, carefully crafted, meticulously executed, was now visible in its entirety. She had seen the strings he intended to pull, and she would ensure they did not sway her or her mother. A soft knock at the door startled her momentarily, but she ignored it, her attention returning to the envelope. Each gift, each note, each promise held a lesson, a hint, a piece of the puzzle she would unravel with precision. Time passed slowly, the hours stretching into the deep night. Julian's call continued on the recorded line, revealing more than he ever intended, exposing intentions he had hoped would remain secret. Maya listened, analyzing, understanding, calculating, preparing for the next encounter with the man who had returned under the guise of redemption. By the time the city fell silent, Maya had formed a plan of her own. She would not allow herself to be charmed. She would not be manipulated. She would confront, test, and expose Julian for what he truly was. The envelope sat on her bedside table, a silent witness to the shift in control. She stared at it, fingers brushing the edges, feeling a sense of anticipation mingled with satisfaction. For the first time, she felt the upper hand in a game that had always been dictated by Julian's rules. Her mother's words echoed softly in her mind. "We control the game, not him. No matter what he says or does, we see through it. Together." Maya smiled in the darkness, knowing the night had given them the advantage. The city outside slumbered, unaware that within the walls of a small home, the balance of power had shifted, that a father's subtle smirk had been met with the sharp insight of a child who refused to be deceived, and that a mother's unwavering vigilance ensured that truth and love would remain intact. Julian's plan, neatly labeled and meticulously designed, had been intercepted, observed, and understood. The threads of his intentions were visible now, tangled and exposed in the hands of the very people he thought to manipulate. Maya closed her eyes, calm but alert, the weight of responsibility resting lightly on her small shoulders. She knew tomorrow would bring the next test, the next challenge, the next subtle moves from a man who believed charm and gifts could rewrite history. She whispered softly to herself, a quiet promise in the stillness of the night. "We see you, and we're ready." The envelope sat silently beside her, a symbol of strategy, vigilance, and impending confrontation. That night, Julian called Nia, unaware that Maya had intercepted every word, every plan, every manipulation he thought was secret. The night air was heavy with tension when Nia finally hung up the phone, Julian's name lingering in the room like a shadow that refused to leave. Maya's small hands fidgeted with a crayon, her green eyes narrowing in quiet contemplation. The envelope from earlier lay scattered on the floor, a silent testament to Julian's careful orchestration of charm and deceit. Nia sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders like an iron mantle. Julian's calls, his words dripping with contrived remorse, had been steady since that afternoon. But tonight, something in his tone had shifted. a subtle urgency, a hint of impatience barely masked by the veneer of fatherly concern. Maya approached quietly, her little feet making soft taps on the wooden floor. "Mama," she said in a voice that carried both fear and curiosity. He called again. He sounded different. "I think he knows I read the envelope." Nia's heart skipped. She knew her daughter had intercepted Julian's manipulations, but hearing Maya articulate it brought the danger closer, sharpened and real. She pulled Maya into her lap, holding her tightly, feeling the warmth and fragility of her child's trust. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "We will handle this together. But we have to be careful." The next morning, Julian arrived at the designated park, his tailored coat hanging loosely, yet still exuding the control and precision that had always unnerved Nia. The children's swings creaked gently in the crisp air, and Maya's eyes flitted nervously between her mother and the man who had once abandoned them both. Nia stood beside her daughter, her hands gripping the stroller with a quiet, firm insistence on protection. Julian's gaze lingered on Maya, a calculated softness that seemed designed to disarm. He smiled, but the curve of his lips held a subtle coldness, a hint of the man he had always been beneath the polished surface. Maya, armed with the awareness Nia had cultivated in her, refused to approach him immediately. She clutched her backpack, glancing at the envelope once more in her mind, memorizing the words and the subtle manipulations hidden within. Julian spoke first, his tone smooth, coaxing. "Maya, I've missed you. I've changed. Don't you want to come play with me for a while?" His words were honeyed, but Maya's instincts twitched. She remembered the trips promised, the extravagant gifts, the manipulative notes all hidden behind the envelope's neat folds. Nia intervened gently but firmly. "Maya, you decide if you want to interact. Remember, he's under supervision, and we watch closely. Trust your instincts." Maya nodded, her small jaw set in determination. Slowly, with cautious steps, she approached Julian, holding a piece of paper and a box of crayons. She sat down a safe distance away on the grass, unfolding the paper. Julian crouched, trying to mirror her actions, his green eyes locked onto hers, searching for signs of vulnerability. As Julian spoke of imagined adventures, promised outings, and a new life together, Maya began to draw. Lines became shapes, shapes became symbols, capturing his gestures, his words, his subtle changes in tone. Each figure reflected what she saw, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, hands that shifted too deliberately, eyes that scanned for reaction rather than connection. Nia watched quietly, observing both Julian and Maya. She realized the depth of her daughter's perception. It was sharper than her own, trained not by fear but by understanding. Julian, sensing the distance growing, tried to push further. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Maya, why don't you trust me yet? Don't you remember how much I loved you before?" The words were soft, almost tender, but the timing, the pattern, the calculated pauses spoke volumes to Nia. It was the same rhythm, the same strategy, the same false charm he had wielded before. Maya paused, glancing at Nia, then back to Julian, crayon poised like a small weapon. Minutes passed. Julian's patience waned imperceptibly. His gestures became more pronounced. His voice dipped into a coaxing purr, a dangerous familiarity that had once ensnared both mother and child. Maya's drawing evolved quickly, an elaborate diagram capturing his movements, the angles of his posture, the way he leaned too far into space that was hers. Nia leaned closer, feeling the gravity of the moment. She realized Julian's change could be a veneer, and Maya's intuitive responses might reveal the truth. Julian extended a hand, inviting Maya to come closer, to trust him, to share a moment of connection. Maya hesitated, her small hand hovering over the drawing, her eyes darting to Nia for reassurance. Nia's subtle nod told her, "Observe, respond, protect." Maya's small lips pressed together. She whispered almost under her breath, "Not yet." Julian's brow furrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face before he masked it with a charming smile. As the sun climbed higher, Julian's tactics became increasingly visible. The soft words, the strategic compliments, the promise of trips and toys. Each gesture, each carefully calculated phrase, was recorded in Maya's growing artwork. Nia noted the pattern, a subtle manipulation emerging from his rehearsed charm. She realized that Julian's redeemed persona might be nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion designed to regain control over their lives. Nia's mind raced. How many times had she been deceived by charm before? How many times had her trust been exploited? She looked at Julian, saw the man he was trying to become, and felt a mixture of sadness and wariness. This was a test, one Julian didn't even know was underway. And Maya, with her innocent yet sharp perception, held the key to understanding the truth before it could harm them. Julian grew frustrated. He attempted to mirror Maya's drawing, suggesting stories, pointing to shapes, pretending engagement. But Maya's careful lines told the real story. His smile was too calculated, his promises too grand, his eyes too analytical. Nia saw it all unfolding, the subtle cracks, the manipulative undertones, the carefully hidden agenda. Her heart ached, not from fear, but from clarity. Julian's false redemption was being revealed in front of them both. The park grew quieter as Julian's attempts became more desperate. He suggested a picnic, a trip to the zoo, even a weekend getaway. Maya listened, nodding politely, but her crayon never stopped moving. She captured every nuance, the way he positioned himself, the pauses in his speech, the slight tightening of his jaw when she didn't respond as expected. Nia saw the truth forming, a silent narrative drawn by her daughter's hand. Minutes stretched into hours. Julian's smirk, once subtle, began to falter. He sensed resistance, a barrier he could not charm away. Nia's quiet authority and Maya's perceptive eyes made him realize that his influence had limits. His carefully rehearsed lines were being dissected, analyzed, and exposed. The illusion of control was slipping, and the panic, though hidden behind his composed exterior, was rising. Maya finally put down her crayon and looked at Nia. "Mama," she whispered softly, fear and realization in her eyes. "I think he's trying again. I don't want him to hurt us." The words were tiny, yet they landed with the weight of truth. Nia felt a chill run down her spine. Julian had no idea that his every move was being observed, dissected, and recorded by a child whose instinct had been sharpened by survival. Julian's smile faltered, his gaze flicking between Maya and Nia, sensing the shift. For the first time, he realized that the woman and child he had abandoned were not powerless, not naive, and not vulnerable to manipulation. His eyes betrayed the faintest hint of frustration, a subtle acknowledgement that his previous strategies might no longer work. The air thickened. Nia's hands rested on her daughter's shoulders, her grip firm and protective. She looked at Julian, her voice calm but sharp. "You will not manipulate us, Julian. Not today. Not ever." Her words were a shield, a declaration, and a challenge. Julian's jaw tightened, and for a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the distant hum of the park and the soft rustle of leaves. Maya, sensing the tension, clutched her mother's hand tightly. Julian's manipulative charm had collided with a force he had not accounted for, a mother's protection and a daughter's perceptive clarity. He tried to maintain composure, but the edge in Nia's voice, the intelligence in Maya's eyes, and the evidence in the drawing were undeniable. He straightened, cleared his throat, and attempted one last gesture of innocence. I just want to spend time with you both. Isn't that fair?" His words hung in the air, seemingly sincere, but Nia and Maya could sense the subtle undertone. Control, testing boundaries, and manipulation still lingered beneath the surface. Maya shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper but firm. "No, not like this. Not anymore." The words struck Julian with unexpected force. He realized that the dynamics had changed. The child was no longer blind to his tactics, and the mother was no longer willing to tolerate manipulation. Nia looked at Julian with unwavering resolve, her brown eyes steady, reflecting years of resilience and careful judgment. "We will interact on our terms. You will not dictate how we feel. You will not manipulate us. Do you understand?" Julian hesitated, caught between his practiced charm and the reality he faced. The realization was dawning. Superficial apologies, strategic gifts, and manipulations could no longer break their bond or sway their judgment. The park's distant laughter and the soft chatter of other parents formed a backdrop to this intense confrontation. Julian knew he had underestimated both women. Maya's intuitive perception, combined with Nia's protective clarity, formed an impenetrable shield. He could no longer proceed without revealing his true intentions or risking exposure. The tension was electric, the kind that made hearts pound and breaths shallow. Julian's next moves were critical, yet every gesture was scrutinized, every word analyzed. Nia's steady presence and Maya's perceptive observations forced him into a corner, one from which charm and false remorse could not rescue him. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Julian's composure wavered for a fraction of a second, a rare crack in his otherwise controlled demeanor. Maya's eyes caught it immediately, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Mama, I think he's trying again. I don't want him to hurt us." The words hung in the air like a storm warning, a quiet alarm that everything was not as it seemed, and that Julian's intentions were far from innocent. Maya clutched Nia's hand tightly, eyes wide, whispering, "Mama, he's planning something. I can feel it. We have to be ready." The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the city in warm amber hues, but Nia's world felt cold. She had agreed to another supervised visit, hoping, as she always did, that Julian might show even a fraction of the man he claimed to be. Maya, ever cautious, clung to her mother's hand, her little fingers pressing into Nia's palm, a silent anchor of reality in a world that had long taught her to question, trust. They arrived at the quiet park Julian had insisted on, claiming it would be a safe place for honest conversations. Nia's eyes scanned the surroundings, every movement of Julian measured and calculated, and yet she noticed a subtle nervousness in his posture, a hint of overcompensation in the way he approached. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maya instinctively recoiled slightly, sensing a difference she couldn't yet articulate in words but could feel deep in her chest. Julian kneeled to meet her daughter's eyes, his hands extended in a gesture that had once meant warmth, once promised care. "Maya," he said, his voice soft but carrying that unmistakable undertone of persuasion, "I missed you. I want us to be a family again." Maya's lips pressed together, her brow furrowed in concentration, her mind racing. Something in the air didn't feel right. The words were familiar, too polished, too rehearsed. Her small hand trembled slightly in Nia's grip. Nia's instincts screamed. She had spent years learning the signs, the subtle patterns of Julian's manipulation. She let Maya take the lead, observing quietly as her daughter studied him with a level of perception far beyond her years. Julian reached into his bag, producing a small notebook filled with colorful sketches, little toys, and trinkets he claimed were for Maya. The gifts, meant to soften and distract, landed like empty promises in Nia's chest. As Julian turned to adjust his posture, Nia caught a glimpse of movement from across the park. A woman emerged from behind a cluster of trees, stylish, confident, radiating a presence that clashed violently with the atmosphere Julian had tried to cultivate. She approached Julian with ease, a familiarity that spoke louder than any whispered claim of change. Their laughter, light and unrestrained, carried across the space. Nia's heart constricted. This was not the man she had once loved in earnest, the man who had promised loyalty, the man who had abandoned them. Maya followed her mother's gaze, her green eyes widening with understanding. She tilted her head, a silent question forming on her small lips, and Nia shook her head slightly, signaling her to watch, to observe, to let the truth unfold before her own young mind. The mistress brushed a lock of hair from Julian's face, her hand lingering, a touch that spoke of intimacy, of secrets, of betrayals hidden behind smiles and promises. Julian's own demeanor relaxed, a sharp contrast to the careful, performative calm he had attempted to show in front of Nia and Maya. He didn't even notice their presence at first. Maya's fingers tightened around Nia's hand. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. He's with someone else." Nia's jaw tightened. The pieces clicked together in her mind. The trips, the gifts, the rehearsed words. They had all been part of a facade. Julian had returned, claiming redemption, claiming change. But here was the undeniable proof that his motives were shallow, that his heart remained unrepentant, that his promises were nothing more than strategies veiled in charm. Maya's small hand trembled slightly, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and betrayal flooding her young mind. She turned her gaze toward her father, trying to reconcile the man who had claimed love for her with the one who laughed so freely with another woman. Julian finally noticed them then, the subtle shift in the air alerting him that his audience was larger than anticipated. His smile faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of calculation, an instinctive mask of control. "Nia," he said, voice careful now, measured. "This isn't what it looks. Electric, the kind that made hearts pound and breaths shallow." Julian's next moves were critical, yet every gesture was scrutinized, every word analyzed. Nia's steady presence and Maya's perceptive observations forced him into a corner, one from which charm and false remorse could not rescue him. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Julian's composure wavered for a fraction of a second, a rare crack in his otherwise controlled demeanor. Maya's eyes caught it immediately, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Mama, I think he's trying again. I don't want him to hurt us." The words hung in the air like a storm warning, a quiet alarm that everything was not as it seemed, and that Julian's intentions were far from innocent. Maya clutched Nia's hand tightly, eyes wide, whispering, "Mama, he's planning something. I can feel it. We have to be ready." The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the city in warm amber hues, but Nia's world felt cold. She had agreed to another supervised visit, hoping, as she always did, that Julian might show even a fraction of the man he claimed to be. Maya, ever cautious, clung to her mother's hand, her little fingers pressing into Nia's palm, a silent anchor of reality in a world that had long taught her to question, trust. They arrived at the quiet park Julian had insisted on, claiming it would be a safe place for honest conversations. Nia's eyes scanned the surroundings, every movement of Julian measured and calculated, and yet she noticed a subtle nervousness in his posture, a hint of overcompensation in the way he approached. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maya instinctively recoiled slightly, sensing a difference she couldn't yet articulate in words but could feel deep in her chest. Julian kneeled to meet her daughter's eyes, his hands extended in a gesture that had once meant warmth, once promised care. "Maya," he said, his voice soft but carrying that unmistakable undertone of persuasion, "I missed you. I want us to be a family again." Maya's lips pressed together, her brow furrowed in concentration, her mind racing. Something in the air didn't feel right. The words were familiar, too polished, too rehearsed. Her small hand trembled slightly in Nia's grip. Nia's instincts screamed. She had spent years learning the signs, the subtle patterns of Julian's manipulation. She let Maya take the lead, observing quietly as her daughter studied him with a level of perception far beyond her years. Julian reached into his bag, producing a small notebook filled with colorful sketches, little toys, and trinkets he claimed were for Maya. The gifts, meant to soften and distract, landed like empty promises in Nia's chest. As Julian turned to adjust his posture, Nia caught a glimpse of movement from across the park. A woman emerged from behind a cluster of trees, stylish, confident, radiating a presence that clashed violently with the atmosphere Julian had tried to cultivate. She approached Julian with ease, a familiarity that spoke louder than any whispered claim of change. Their laughter, light and unrestrained, carried across the space. Nia's heart constricted. This was not the man she had once loved in earnest, the man who had promised loyalty, the man who had abandoned them. Maya followed her mother's gaze, her green eyes widening with understanding. She tilted her head, a silent question forming on her small lips, and Nia shook her head slightly, signaling her to watch, to observe, to let the truth unfold before her own young mind. The mistress brushed a lock of hair from Julian's face, her hand lingering, a touch that spoke of intimacy, of secrets, of betrayals hidden behind smiles and promises. Julian's own demeanor relaxed, a sharp contrast to the careful, performative calm he had attempted to show in front of Nia and Maya. He didn't even notice their presence at first. Maya's fingers tightened around Nia's hand. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. He's with someone else." Nia's jaw tightened. The pieces clicked together in her mind. The trips, the gifts, the rehearsed words. They had all been part of a facade. Julian had returned, claiming redemption, claiming change. But here was the undeniable proof that his motives were shallow, that his heart remained unrepentant, that his promises were nothing more than strategies veiled in charm. Maya's small hand trembled slightly, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and betrayal flooding her young mind. She turned her gaze toward her father, trying to reconcile the man who had claimed love for her with the one who laughed so freely with another woman. Julian finally noticed them then, the subtle shift in the air alerting him that his audience was larger than anticipated. His smile faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of calculation, an instinctive mask of control. "Nia," he said, voice careful now, measured. "This isn't what it looks like." But Nia had heard enough. The pause, the hesitation, the instinctive attempt at damage control, it all spoke louder than any words could. She stepped forward, her posture firm, a boundary drawn in the quiet park. "Julian," she said, voice low but icy, "I've seen enough." Maya, now standing slightly ahead of Nia, looked directly at her father. The anger and hurt in her green eyes mirrored the wisdom of someone who had seen the world bend under deceit. She spoke, her voice trembling, raw with the weight of her realization, yet steady with newfound conviction. "Daddy, you lied. You promised change, but you're still the same." Julian's eyes flickered, a shadow of something like guilt or shame crossing his features, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the practiced smirk of someone who still believed charm could cover truth. Nia stepped closer to her daughter, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Maya, you know the truth now. Trust isn't given lightly. Love isn't earned with gifts or empty promises. Always remember that." Maya nodded, her jaw tight, her small hands clenched into fists. She had seen the world's duplicity in the simplest act of observation, and it was enough to change the way she felt about the man who had once been her hero. The mistress, sensing the tension, gave a polite, tight-lipped smile and stepped back, fading into the distance with Julian beside her, their laughter now a memory seared into the minds of the two women who had once allowed themselves hope. Julian finally turned to face Nia, his expression a complex tapestry of frustration, realization, and suppressed desire. He opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, perhaps to plead, perhaps to manipulate again. But no words could undo the clarity now shining in Maya's young eyes, nor the resolute steel in Nia's posture. Nia's heart beat heavily, a mix of sadness for what could have been and fierce protection for what was. She stepped forward slightly, meeting Julian's gaze with a quiet, unshakable authority. "You wanted redemption, Julian," she said softly, her voice carrying both sorrow and judgment. "But you brought only proof of your lies. Leave now, before the facade shatters completely." Julian swallowed hard, realizing that this time, charm would not save him, that manipulation would not reclaim lost trust, that love could not be forced back into a heart hardened by repeated betrayal. Maya's eyes glistened with tears, not of fear, but of recognition. She had loved him once, she had hoped, but now she knew that some truths were unchangeable, that some people could not be trusted, and that some promises were too hollow to hold weight. Julian's shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that he had been exposed, that he had failed not just Nia, but his daughter, that the image of a changed man had been dismantled before the eyes of the only two people who mattered. Maya turned to her mother, a quiet, definitive gesture that spoke volumes. She drew in a shaky breath, the words forming in her small, determined voice. "Mama, today I'm done pretending he's my dad. From now on, he's gone." Nia's heart clenched, a bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow. She pulled Maya close, feeling the strength in her resolve, the clarity of her judgment, the unshakable bond between mother and daughter that no man could ever break. The park seemed to exhale with them, the wind carrying away the echoes of betrayal, leaving behind only the truth, the certainty, and the quiet promise of a life rebuilt on honesty and love rather than deceit and empty charm. Julian lingered a moment longer, watching them walk away, the distance between them not just physical but insurmountable, a chasm carved by lies, betrayal, and the revelation of the mistress. He opened his mouth again, perhaps to argue, to plead, to reclaim, but no words could bridge what had been broken. For the first time, Julian realized that some doors, once closed, never reopened, and that the strongest hearts, those of Nia and Maya, would not bend to the weight of manipulation. Maya's tiny hand squeezed Nia's as they walked toward the car, their steps in perfect synchronicity, their resolve unshakable. The envelope of gifts, the promises, the manipulations, they were meaningless now, swept away by clarity and courage. The mistress and Julian faded into the distance, but the memory lingered, a shadow Julian would carry, a lesson he had yet to fully comprehend, and a warning that the heart, once protected, would never be easily deceived again. The air was heavy with truth, and the mother-daughter bond radiated in defiance of betrayal, a living testament that some people, some manipulations, some lies could never break what was forged in love and vigilance. And as the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, Julian watched from afar, the weight of realization pressing down on him, while Nia and Maya moved forward together, unbroken, untouchable, and resolute. The lesson had been learned, the mask had been removed, and Maya, small but unflinchingly wise, had spoken the words that would echo in Julian's mind for years to come. Maya looks up at Nia, her eyes wide with certainty, and says, "Mama, today I'm done pretending he's my dad. From now on, he's gone." The sun filtered gently through the blinds, casting warm golden stripes across the polished floor of Nia's living room. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, crayons spread around her like a burst of color waiting to tell a story. Her small hands moved with intent, pressing the crayon to paper, each stroke deliberate, each color chosen not by accident, but by thought. She had watched her father's false charm and insincerity like a shadow, and now, in the safety of her home, She was ready to speak truth in the language she knew best. Nia watched quietly from the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, her posture calm but alert. She had seen Julian's repeated attempts to manipulate, to charm, to infiltrate their lives. Every visit, every smile, every gesture he made was calculated, honed to perfection. And yet, she also recognized the weight that a child could carry, the innocence that could reveal more than any adult confrontation ever could. Maya had grown up learning to see beyond the surface, and today Nia let her daughter guide the lesson. The crayon scraped across the paper, soft yet resolute, creating shapes, lines, and finally figures that spoke louder than words. Two stick figures, one small, one taller, a line of connection between them that was uneven but strong. And in the corner, the title, Mama equals my world, Papa equals lost forever. Maya's green eyes sparkled with a mix of determination and sadness, the kind of wisdom that no child should have to wield. Yet here she was, delivering a truth that struck harder than any confrontation. Nia rose, taking the drawing gently from Maya's hands. Her gaze met her daughter's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a pact, unspoken but unbreakable. "You're being very brave, baby," she whispered softly, her voice filled with warmth and pride. Maya only nodded, her small lips pressed together, understanding that this moment was bigger than fear, bigger than anger, bigger than anything Julian could ever teach her. Minutes later, the controlled meeting began. Julian sat across from them, his posture still impeccably straight, his tailored suit flawless. But an unease lingered in his eyes. He had no idea what waited for him on that piece of paper, no inkling of the emotional force about to hit him like a tidal wave. He smiled politely, a practiced mask of confidence, unaware that this time masks would fail. Nia cleared her throat. "Julian," she began, her voice calm but with an edge that cut through the air. "Maya has something for you." She handed the drawing to him without preamble, the edges of the paper crisp in her fingers, the colors vibrant under the light. Julian took it carefully, glancing at it with casual interest, expecting perhaps a sweet doodle, a harmless gesture from his daughter. But as his eyes moved across the crayon lines, the connection between the figures, the bold, clear words, the truth laid bare, something inside him faltered. His heart stuttered, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years, a raw, unguarded response to the innocence that had spoken with precision and power. Maya sat a few feet away, her small hands resting on her knees, eyes unwavering, fixed on him. She was ready to witness, to hold steady while her father absorbed what she had been too young to voice in words. But now, through her art, through her honesty, she delivered a message impossible to ignore. Julian's fingers trembled slightly as he clutched the paper. The words, "Mama equals my world, Papa equals lost forever," burned through the carefully constructed layers of ego and denial he had relied upon for so long. Every memory of absence, every choice that had placed ambition above love, every betrayal he had committed returned with relentless clarity. He was confronted not by lawyers, not by arguments, not by society's judgment, but by the innocent, piercing truth of a child he had claimed to love, but had never truly known. Nia observed him carefully, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw, the slight quiver in his lips, the way his eyes flicked to Maya, searching for forgiveness, recognition, a chance to undo the unfixable. She did not give him any of it. Her silence was deliberate, her restraint measured. She let the weight of the drawing, the gravity of Maya's words, do the work. Julian's breath hitched. He whispered almost to himself, I didn't realize." His voice cracked under the strain, revealing a man stripped of his carefully cultivated persona. There was no bravado, no manipulation, no subtle smirk hiding intention. Only raw, unfiltered emotion, shock, disbelief, and heartbreak, all mingled into one. Maya's gaze remained steady, She did not flinch when tears glimmered in his eyes. She had watched, learned, and now asserted herself. Her voice was soft, almost imperceptible, yet full of conviction. "Mama is my world," she repeated, almost like a mantra, reinforcing the truth that Julian had failed to grasp. She did not need him. She had Nia, and that bond was unbreakable. Julian lowered the drawing slowly, his hands shaking, the edges crumpling ever so slightly under his grip. The room seemed to constrict around him, the walls closing in as the enormity of the moment sank deep. He had imagined reconciliation, control, charm. He had planned, calculated, and assumed he could win back their trust. But the innocence of a child's truth, the sharp clarity of a young heart, shattered all of his illusions in a single stroke of crayon. Nia reached out, placing a comforting hand on Maya's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it reinforced a power Julian had never truly held. The authority of earned love, not demanded loyalty. She whispered quietly, "You've spoken your truth, baby. You've made sure he knows." Julian sat frozen, staring at the drawing, unable to look at Maya directly. His mind raced, searching for words, for an argument, for a way to recover some fragment of dignity. But none came. The power he had wielded for so long, the charm he had believed invincible, had crumbled under the weight of simple honesty and unwavering integrity. Time seemed suspended. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. Julian's eyes glistened, and for the first time, he understood the depth of what he had lost. Not wealth, not influence, not reputation, but the irreplaceable connection with a child who had once trusted him implicitly. He leaned back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His voice cracked, broken, incomplete. He tried again. I didn't understand. But no words could carry the weight of Maya's declaration. Nia's gaze remained unwavering, her calm deliberate, her resolve unshakable. She let the silence speak, let the truth resonate. Julian had finally been confronted by the unvarnished reality of his choices, and there was no escape. Maya tilted her head slightly, small eyes unwavering. "From now on, Papa," she said with surprising firmness for her age, "you're lost forever." Julian closed his eyes, whispering, barely audible, I don't know if I can fix this." His voice carried despair, the realization of a man who had misjudged life, love, and trust. Nia placed her hand firmly over Maya's. "You don't have to," she said softly. "Not anymore." The room was filled with unspoken truths, the weight of decisions, and the innocence of a child that had finally spoken louder than manipulation, wealth, and charm combined. Julian sat stunned, heartbroken, and utterly powerless. He finally looked up at Maya, the pain in his eyes mirroring the devastation of a man who had glimpsed the consequences of his own selfishness for the first time in decades. There was nothing left to negotiate, no way to charm, no plan to recover what he had destroyed. And in that heavy silence, Nia realized something profound. This was not just a moment of confrontation, but a turning point. Julian had seen the truth, and the weight of it would follow him forever. Julian whispers in disbelief, his voice barely audible, trembling. I can't believe. She sees me for who I really am." Nia closed the door of her office with a soft click, the sound echoing in the quiet space she had built over years of sacrifice and relentless determination. The golden afternoon light streamed through the large windows, catching the dust motes and illuminating the rows of neatly arranged books and glowing AI terminals. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the empire she had carved from nothing, her mind settling on the weight of the past, the present, and the fragile peace she now held. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook open, crayon in hand. She hummed softly, coloring with focused intensity, unaware of the magnitude of the world around her, yet fully absorbing the sanctuary her mother had created. Nia allowed herself a small, rare smile at the sight. Her daughter's innocence, her laughter, her tiny hands. These were the treasures Julian could never touch, no matter how polished his apologies or extravagant his gestures. Letters and parcels had begun arriving from Julian, each one more elaborate than the last. Fine stationery, carefully folded envelopes, small gifts, every attempt a calculated move to regain control. Nia examined each one with calm precision, setting them aside unopened when she felt the faintest whisper of manipulation. She knew his game, had studied it over years of observation, and she would not allow the ghost of past betrayal to dictate her future. Maya glanced up from her drawing. "Mama, he sent me another one today." Nia nodded, taking the envelope gently. She opened it in a controlled, deliberate motion, revealing another set of carefully crafted letters and a small, glittering bracelet. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She read silently, every sentence sharp and polished, designed to evoke guilt, to make her question her decisions, to force an opening for Julian to re-enter their lives. But she remained unmoved. "Your money, your words, cannot fix what you broke," Nia said aloud, her voice steady, deliberate. Maya's small head lifted, listening. "Maya's heart is not yours to claim. You don't get to dictate our lives anymore." Maya hugged her legs, nodding. "I don't want him to hurt us again, Mama. Ever." That night, Julian sat in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. The city lights glittered like stars below, but none of their beauty reached him. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails, messages, news alerts, but nothing captured his attention except for the gnawing realization that every attempt to reclaim what he had lost had failed. Every letter, every gesture, every carefully planned moment of charm and persuasion had been met with refusal, calm authority, and the impenetrable barrier of Nia's self-respect. The next morning, Nia arrived at the headquarters of her growing empire, each step measured, each breath purposeful. Staff greeted her respectfully, aware of the woman who had transformed a small bookstore into a global force of innovation, integrity, and empowerment. She moved through the open workspace, checking progress, reviewing reports, and mentoring young talent. Every decision she made reinforced the boundaries she had set, and every success reinforced the truth that she needed no one else to define her. Julian tried another approach. A call, smooth, carefully rehearsed. "Nia, I just want a chance to explain, to show that I've changed. Let me—" "Julian," Nia interrupted, her tone sharp, unyielding. "There's nothing left to explain. Nothing to prove. Your change is irrelevant. Maya's life, her happiness, and the empire I've built are not up for negotiation." He paused, a flash of frustration crossing his carefully constructed facade. "I've been through counseling. I've—" "Counseling doesn't erase the past," Nia replied evenly. "Your attempts are just echoes of a man who once abandoned us. I see them for what they are, empty gestures, hollow apologies. And Maya sees them too. You cannot manipulate love or trust." Maya peeked from the doorway, arms crossed. "You can't trick us, Papa," she said, quietly but firmly. Julian's eyes flicked to her, the innocence and clarity in her gaze cutting deeper than any argument. She had witnessed, observed, and understood far more than he had anticipated. Julian's hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down, realizing that his old strategies, the charm, the subtle intimidation, the promises disguised as affection, were no longer effective. Every attempt was dismantled before it even left his lips. Nia spent that afternoon reviewing expansion plans, each document, each chart, each strategy meticulously considered. Her empire was no longer a small sanctuary. It was a thriving network of influence, innovation, and community impact. She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of how far she had come and how utterly untouchable she had become in every sense that mattered. The world began to notice. Social media buzzed with praise, articles highlighted her work, and industry leaders took note of the bookstore's innovative AI-driven programs. Each accolade was a shield against Julian's lingering attempts to interfere, a confirmation that her decisions were not only wise but transformative. Julian, isolated in his Manhattan penthouse, scrolled through news feeds, his stomach twisting as he saw headlines praising Nia's vision and resilience. His carefully curated image, built over decades, now felt brittle, exposed, irrelevant. The realization hit him harder than any personal confrontation could. The woman he had tried to control had flourished without him. She had grown, evolved, and built an empire he could never reclaim. In the quiet of her office, Nia poured herself a cup of tea and watched Maya carefully arrange books on a shelf. She thought of the letters, the gestures, the manipulation, and she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Not triumph over a man, but pride in a life rebuilt, in boundaries enforced, and in the unshakable safety of her daughter's heart. A sudden ping on her laptop interrupted the moment. A notification from an international business forum, an invitation to showcase her work, to speak about innovation, resilience, and leadership. Her empire was gaining recognition far beyond the town, the country, the reach she had ever imagined. She paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the pulse of opportunity and influence spreading out from her carefully constructed sanctuary. The power of autonomy, of self-reliance, of integrity. She had proven it, and the world was beginning to acknowledge it. Maya ran past, laughing, carefree, the innocence of her life intact. Nia watched, her heart full, knowing that she had protected the most important thing, their world, their truth, their lives unbroken. Her phone buzzed again. Another attempt from Julian. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out at the horizon, sunlight glinting off the skyline, and allowed herself a small, calm smile. No words could undo what she had accomplished. No money, no charm, no manipulation could breach the fortress she had built around her daughter and herself. She returned to her work, organizing meetings, planning projects, and setting strategies. Each decision, each action reinforced the life she had carved, a life untainted by betrayal, a life defined by integrity, and a life that was now impossible for Julian to infiltrate. By evening, Nia and Maya sat together in the quiet living room, sketching ideas for the bookstore's next expansion. The walls, lined with books and memories, bore witness to the journey from pain to power. Every corner of the space reflected resilience, courage, and unwavering strength. Nia glanced at Maya and said softly, "We've built something that cannot be taken, something that can't be manipulated, something that will last long after anyone tries to control it." Maya hugged her mother tightly. "I love our world, Mama, and we're safe." Nia nodded, holding her daughter close, letting the warmth of the moment settle in. She knew challenges would come, but the foundation was unshakable. Every step she had taken, every boundary she had enforced, every lesson she had taught Maya had created a life that no one, not even Julian, could dismantle. She allowed herself to relax slightly, letting the sense of achievement wash over her. The empire, the daughter, the integrity, they were all hers, untouchable, thriving, and for the first time in years, Nia felt truly free. The evening deepened, shadows stretching across the floor as the sky outside turned from gold to deep indigo. A gentle breeze fluttered the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Nia's mind wandered briefly to the future, considering possibilities, expansion, and recognition beyond anything she had imagined. She allowed herself a single private thought. The world was finally seeing her, not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. And in Manhattan, Julian sat alone, his empire of wealth feeling hollow, insignificant. Every attempt to reclaim control had failed. Every gesture of apology, every gift, every plan, nullified by the unyielding strength of a woman who had survived betrayal and built a world he could never touch. He stared at his reflection in the glass, green eyes flickering with the remnants of desire, regret, and disbelief. The truth was undeniable. Nia had not only protected Maya, she had become unstoppable. And the realization filled him with both awe and fear, the awareness that he had lost far more than he could ever regain. The night deepened, the city lights flickering below, and a single notification appeared on his phone. A headline about Nia's growing influence, her bookstore being recognized globally. He froze, the weight of her triumph pressing down. His carefully constructed world, his control, his power. They felt meaningless now. And somewhere deep in his chest, a spark of panic ignited. Nia had grown beyond him, beyond his reach. Her life, her daughter, her empire, they were hers alone. Julian receives news that Nia's business is gaining global attention. The news came at noon, sharp and insistent, delivered in a voice that carried both urgency and false intimacy. Julian's office phone rang, a sound he normally enjoyed, a harbinger of deals, power, control. But today it was different. He listened carefully, nodding, a practiced calm in his voice as the words poured in. A crisis had arisen, a financial collapse, a threat he claimed could devastate lives, including Nia's. He imagined her panic before it even reached her ears. He imagined Maya's small hands shaking, her wide eyes brimming with unspoken worry. Julian had rehearsed every emotion, every gasp, every sign of fear he thought would bend them back to him. His plan was meticulous, a chessboard of manipulation and control, each piece arranged to ensure dependence. Nia, however, had become someone he no longer understood. She answered his call, voice steady, composed, a soft steel beneath her calm. "Julian," she said, "we know this is you. What game are you playing this time?" Her words were like cold water, dousing the fire of anticipation he had built within himself. There was no tremor, no hesitation, no trace of the panic he had expected. Just clarity, and it enraged him in ways he had never felt before. How could she see through him so effortlessly, so quickly? Meanwhile, Maya, seated at her small drawing desk, had been observing silently. The clues had been subtle, a pattern of exaggeration, the timing of messages, the calculated fear in Julian's voice. She had learned to read between lines that no adult dared to question, to see the hidden intent behind smiles that were far too smooth, far too practiced. "Mom," she whispered, eyes scanning the documents Julian had sent electronically. "Something's wrong here. He wants us to panic, to need him." Nia nodded slightly, eyes narrowing. "Exactly. He's hoping our reaction will give him control. He's hoping fear will make us forget everything he's done. But we won't." Julian arrived at the arranged meeting place, a neutral location he thought would feel safe enough for them to comply, yet isolated enough to ensure dependency. His face was a mask of concern, eyes wide, posture tense, but the subtle smirk tugging at the corner of his lips betrayed him. He had rehearsed it, every movement choreographed to perfection, every pause measured for effect. Maya stood before him, small but unyielding, her arms crossed, feet firmly planted on the ground. Her green eyes, once curious and unsure, now bore a silent judgment that pierced deeper than any courtroom confrontation ever had. She had aged in awareness, and Julian realized too late that the child he had once underestimated was now fully awake to his intentions. He tried the usual tactics, his tone soft, pleading. "Maya, honey, you don't understand. I'm here to help. I can fix this. I'm the only one who can—" Maya interrupted him, her voice trembling slightly, but carrying a firmness that made Julian flinch. "Papa, You lied again. You're not my hero. You're just someone I used to know. The words hit him like a physical blow, sharper than any legal defeat, harsher than any public humiliation. He staggered slightly, caught off guard by the raw truth in a child's voice. His hands twitched, his mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for words that would bridge the chasm between his intentions and her perception. Nia, standing behind Maya, placed a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder, a gesture of unity and protection. "Julian," she said, calm but unyielding, "your actions have consequences. Every lie, every manipulation. It ends here. Maya doesn't need saving. She needs truth. And you have nothing left to give her but broken promises." Julian's chest tightened. The careful scaffolding of control he had spent decades constructing collapsed in an instant. His mind raced, trying to find a loophole, a justification, a reason to salvage what little remained of his connection with them. But Maya's gaze held him fast, and Nia's presence was a barrier he could no longer breach. He sank into a chair, unsteady, a rare vulnerability cracking through the veneer of authority he had always maintained. The room felt smaller, the air thick and oppressive. He could feel his pulse hammering in his ears, the silence punctuated only by the quiet hum of distant traffic and the faint shuffle of Maya's small movements. His mind replayed every mistake, every betrayal, every absence. The nights he had missed her first steps, the birthdays he had ignored, the countless small moments of tenderness he had traded for deals and ego. And now, sitting across from the two people who mattered most, he realized that his efforts were futile. His manipulations were transparent, his intentions exposed, and the bridge to their trust was burned beyond repair. Maya, sensing the shift, took a step forward, drawing a small piece of paper from her pocket. She placed it gently on the table, eyes never leaving his. Julian reached for it, hesitant, trembling, and unfolded the crumpled note. Written in her small, precise handwriting were words that mirrored the truth he could no longer evade. "I will not let you lie to me again. You are gone from my heart, Papa. Only Mama is my world." Julian's hands fell to his knees, shaking. His mind struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the finality. He had always believed he could charm, manipulate, or overpower his way back into their lives. But the child's honesty, the mother's unwavering strength, they were forces beyond his control. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the vision he had spent years perfecting. The polished, confident man now fractured and unrecognizable. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, each syllable heavy with disbelief, regret, and an unfamiliar ache of humility. He looked at Nia, searching for a crack in her armor, a hint that he could negotiate forgiveness, a single thread to grasp. But her face was a portrait of resolute composure, every line etched with pain endured, battles fought, and victories claimed. I I thought I could," he whispered, voice raw, trembling, each word a confession he had never allowed himself before. "I thought I could make things right." Maya shook her head slowly, eyes glistening but unwavering. "You can't, Papa. You chose your path, and I choose mine. Mama is my world now. You're just someone I used to know." Julian's shoulders slumped. The weight of realization pressed down on him like never before. He had not lost because of circumstances beyond his control, not because of timing or misunderstanding. He had lost because he had never truly understood what mattered until it was irrevocably gone. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence stretching endlessly as Julian collapsed into himself, a man unmasked, stripped of ego, pride, and pretense. The emotional collapse was not theatrical or calculated. It was the pure, gut-wrenching despair of a person confronting the consequences of years spent chasing the wrong victories. Nia stepped forward, gentle yet firm, placing a hand on his shoulder, not to comfort, but to mark the boundary he could no longer cross. You have learned your lesson, Julian, but learning it doesn't change what you've broken. You are not Maya's hero, and you never will be. Only truth and love can protect her now. Julian bowed his head, unable to look at them, unable to form the sentences that might bridge the chasm between his failures and their lives. The echoes of his past, the enormity of what he had lost, reverberated through him, a deafening reminder of a life squandered. Maya stepped closer to her mother, drawing comfort from the unshakable presence beside her. Julian watched helplessly as the two figures intertwined in quiet solidarity, the realization settling deep into his chest. This bond he could never breach, this trust he could never reclaim. Time seemed suspended, the moment stretching endlessly, carrying with it the full weight of betrayal, revelation, and finality. Julian felt the hollow ache of emptiness, the raw truth of his inadequacy, and the painful awareness that his last attempt had not only failed, it had confirmed what he feared most. Maya had truly closed her heart to him. He remained seated, silent, broken, as mother and daughter walked away, hand in hand, their steps firm, unafraid, their hearts united against the man who had once held all power over them. Julian was left in the aftermath of his own choices, confronting a reality where love, once taken for granted, could never be manipulated back into his grasp. The envelope he had carried, meant to coerce and charm, lay unopened on the table, a symbol of plans that could not succeed, of schemes that had no place in a world ruled by honesty and integrity. His smirk, once a weapon, was gone, replaced by the emptiness of knowing that for the first time in his life, he was powerless against the very truth he had always tried to control. Julian's last attempt had ended not with triumph, not with reconciliation, but with the raw exposure of his failures, the undeniable reality that some bonds cannot be bought, some hearts cannot be swayed, and some consequences cannot be undone. He realized with a shattering clarity that he had lost forever, not just their trust, but the chance to be a part of the lives he had once claimed as his own. And in that silence, that suffocating emptiness, he knew that the life he had built, the world he had conquered, was meaningless without the people he had destroyed. The room faded around him, the sounds of life outside muted, as Julian sat alone with the crushing weight of regret. He had tried, he had schemed, he had manipulated, but love, the pure, unshakable love of a mother and daughter, was beyond his reach, and he understood, perhaps for the first time, the cost of every choice he had ever made. Julian whispers to himself, broken and raw, I, I may have truly lost them, forever. The morning sunlight spilled over Cedar Springs like liquid gold, brushing the rooftops and winding streets with warmth and promise. Birds sang in cautious celebration, their melodies mingling with the distant laughter of children at play. In the heart of this quiet town, Nia Montgomery opened the doors of her bookstore, now a sanctuary of life, learning, and love. The aroma of fresh paper and coffee intertwined, creating a space that pulsed with energy and possibility. Maya skipped ahead, curls bouncing with every step, her small hands clutching a stack of books carefully chosen the night before. Her green eyes sparkled as if holding secret galaxies within them, and her laughter rang out, clear and pure, a reminder to the world that innocence could be both fragile and fiercely brave. Nia watched her daughter, her chest swelling with quiet pride. Every sleepless night, every anxious heartbeat, every battle fought for autonomy had led to this, a life reclaimed, a world reshaped by courage and resilience. Julian's calls went unanswered, his attempts to breach the boundaries carefully drawn by Nia, now met with polite silence and the gentle firmness of someone who had endured too much. Letters, apologies, promises, none reached past the shield that Nia had constructed, a fortress built not of steel but of unwavering resolve. He had wanted control, influence, presence, but she had chosen sovereignty, the kind that could not be bargained for, that could not be taken, only earned. In the small garden behind the bookstore, sunlight dappled the ground through the leaves, casting patterns like living mosaics. Maya sat cross-legged, crayons spread around her, sketching stories only she could tell. Each drawing was an unspoken chronicle of days without fear, evenings filled with warmth, mornings lit by laughter. She looked up at her mother, eyes wide, and whispered, "Mama, do you think Papa will ever understand?" Nia kneeled beside her, brushing a loose curl from her daughter's face. "He might, baby. He might someday see the truth," she said softly. Her voice held no anger, no resentment, only the tempered strength of someone who had learned that love was not possession, and that forgiveness was a gift, not a tool. Maya considered this, then returned to her art, content that the present was enough, that the world was safe under her mother's watch. Weeks passed and the bookstore flourished. The shelves were stacked with books spanning every genre, every imagination, every dream. Local artists exhibited paintings, workshops for children and adults alike thrived. Nia had transformed her grief into innovation, her loss into leadership. She moved through the space with effortless grace, guiding visitors, recommending titles, answering questions with warmth that invited trust. Maya's voice became a fixture in the shop, reading aloud to children gathered on soft rugs, her confidence growing alongside her mother's empire. Julian, observing from afar, saw only the outcomes of choices he had long ignored. Every report he received, every social media mention, every local and now regional praise for Nia's vision stabbed him with reminders of what he had forfeited. He had wealth, power, influence, but not the one thing he had truly desired: his daughter's trust, his family's heart. One afternoon, the golden sun caught Maya's hair as she spun in the garden, the light igniting her curls like molten fire. Nia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, observing. Maya's gaze met hers, then swept toward the distant skyline where Julian's figure lingered, hesitant, tentative, out of place. She frowned slightly, lips pursed, then shook her head decisively. She approached her mother, holding a finished drawing in her hands, a final testament to clarity and choice. "Mama," she said, voice firm and unwavering, "I'm done with him. From today, he is only a memory. You are my world. We are happy, and he has no part in it." Nia's heart clenched and released at the same time. The words carried the innocence of a child, but the weight of someone who had already learned that boundaries could not be crossed. She pulled Maya into an embrace, feeling the solidity of her daughter's conviction and the freedom it brought. They laughed together, letting the sound ride on the golden breeze, a hymn of victory over manipulation, over loss, over absence. Julian watched from the edge of town, the setting sun painting his figure in long, dark shadows. He felt the emptiness of distance, the sting of realization. His attempts to reclaim, to rewrite, to mend had failed against the simple, undeniable power of love, nurtured and protected. He had been a man of control, of ego, of endless ambition, but this moment reminded him that some forces could not be bent, some hearts could not be claimed. He stepped back, the echo of Maya's laughter fading into the distance. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the depth of loss, the sharpness of regret, and the quiet acknowledgement that power alone was never enough. Nia and Maya were thriving, radiant, unbroken, and utterly beyond his reach. As twilight fell, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, Julian whispered into the cooling air, voice raw with understanding. "I finally understand. Some hearts are never mine to claim." Behind him, the distant lights of Cedar Springs glimmered like stars fallen to earth, a testament to resilience, to courage, to the triumph of integrity over manipulation. In that light, Nia and Maya continued their lives, unshaken, their bond unbreakable, their world reclaimed, leaving Julian to reflect on the irreversible consequences of a man who had learned too late that some treasures could not be bought or forced. They had to be earned. The laughter of mother and daughter drifted through the garden one last time, mingling with the soft evening breeze, sealing the story with the quiet power of love and freedom. No wealth, no charm, no plea could breach the walls they had built. And in that truth, the story found its resolution, leaving the past behind and the future open, radiant, and theirs alone. Julian, voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and revelation, whispers to himself, "I finally understand. Some hearts are never mine to claim.